That's a wounded veteran! Yes! That's a wounded veteran! Yes! That's a wounded warrior right there! They got a shield in the fucking head! Yes!
Hey, what's up, troops? It's Jeff Evely, Ops Sgt-Maj with Veterans for Freedom, back with you now on this 30th day of March 2023. We have with us tonight a very special guest, V4F founding member, Tom Marazzo. He's going to spin us up on everything that's going on with the National Citizens Inquiry. Right now, he's going to be giving testimony tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Before I bring him in here, though, I think I'll throw the old philosophy meme for the day up here. Here's this is the bust of Socrates that they're showing here. And the one thing that we know about him, because he didn't leave any writings, but we just know that he was a big, ugly guy. So, and yeah, big, ugly war veteran. It says, claims to be the wisest man in Athens, knows nothing. Okay, so the reference here, he doesn't actually claim to be the wisest man in Athens. It's the oracle, when asked, says that he's the wisest man in Athens. And he says, but the only thing that I know is that I know nothing. In other words, that he is not a source of knowledge. And so then he kind of goes on this quest to figure out what is the source of knowledge. And he goes around asking the experts my favorite question, which is, how do you know that? And what you will find when you do that is that most people are basically full of shit. So, yeah, that's our philosophy meme for the day here. And one other quick slide here is here's Ferryman, and this is yesterday, the Daily Toll. Experts say recent surge in knife violence emphasizes need to ban hunting rifles and shotguns. And today, here's Pierre Poilievre, Trudeau's answer to stabbing deaths, ban hunting rifles. Yep, that is the world that we live in, folks. So without further ado, I think I'll bring Tom in here. Hey, Tom, how you doing, brother?
I'm good. Nice to be back. It's been a while. Yeah,
no kidding. Yeah, so we got a lot to catch up on, I guess. But the top of mind right now this week is the NCI, of course. Yeah, so they're making the rounds all over the country, and this is going to be this is the Toronto leg of it underway, and we already saw some testimony from that today. And you're coming up to tomorrow for
Yes.
give your testimony tomorrow morning. So do you want to give just for our viewers here who might not be familiar, a little rundown of what the NCI is all about, and yeah, take it from there.
Yeah, so this is literally a citizen organized, a citizen funded national inquiry into the COVID response of the Canadian government and provincial level governments. So this is the public's grassroots, very organic, funded and organized inquiry. And it's done in the same sort of fashion as a government inquiry would typically be. So one of the main drivers of this to get it all set up was Preston Manning. And of course, he's had a long career in politics in this country. And so he really is one of the main faces of it, its origins. And I know that he's kind of stepped back because he's involved in an Alberta government inquiry as well. But I can, definitely say, like, I met him on a Zoom call about a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks ago. He's still very much involved.
Yeah,
it's just more in the background. He's less of the public face of this because he's gearing up to do the Alberta government's inquiry as well. So really, this is an important thing because I don't know that this has ever happened where the citizens have held their own inquiry before, which is very kind of unique in the sense that, like I did a video supporting the inquiry because I do believe in it. I think it's an important, worthwhile endeavor. And, you know, you could get the government to do it. And by the way, from my understanding, even a parliamentary inquiry has about the same force and effect as this citizens one, right? It's only the federal government that can really, that's really the control of the government, the power to actually do something. So even if, like, you've seen some of these other committee hearings and stuff like that they've done on the Emergencies Act, you know, in one of my favorite guys to watch in the Conservative Party was Larry Brock. He's fun to watch, and I'd hate to be on the receiving end of a cross-examination from him. But that committee had no force and effect really either. But what it does is it gets the truth out there. It reveals, it shines all this heat and light for public consumption. And this is really, again, just like the Public Order Emergency Commission, this really is another court of public opinion. Where the public can tune in, watch, hear the testimony, and make decisions for themselves. And that's an important thing to to highlight. Now, does this have any force and effect? No, it doesn't. But I think everybody who is supporting this realizes that, look, this is, again, the court of public opinion, and that's why this is going to be important.
Well, I put the purpose and structure here from the NCI's website up, and it says it's a fact-finding mission. So it's to listen, and it says 3 out of 4 Canadians report having been harmed by Canada's COVID-19 policies, to learn what went right and went wrong during the past 3 years, and what are the lessons to be learned from COVID-19 experience, and 3, to recommend ways and means of ensuring that any future national crises are better managed, harms mitigated, and trust in public institutions upheld. So like you say, like it's a fact-finding mission, which I guess we just kind of had with the Rouleau Commission, but in that case, like, that was a very narrow mandate, and I think that what we were all very disappointed with there is how little truth really came out. You know, there is so much more around that requires answering. So this seems to be this is filling that need. That seems to be what they're doing here, is it?
Yeah, and you know, there's a really important thing that I discovered because I did a video supporting the NCI. And something that really kind of stuck out for me as I was preparing and I was kind of writing the things that I wanted to say about this is, and I know it's intuitive already, it's very obvious, but when you really sit and think about it and try to articulate it, the word transparency, and I actually did a lot of research on this. The more transparent you are, the less corruption. The less transparent you are, obviously, the less positive effect. There is much more corruption involved. And so, you know, this is because it's unencumbered by government oversight of any kind. This is the citizens saying, hey, we're going to do this. So this inquiry is free to be as transparent as possible. Whereas the government politics, when that gets involved, they don't want to be transparent. They say they want to be transparent, and then they redact every bloody document. Right. So, you know, you're not going to get transparency out of Trudeau, who says he likes to be transparent. That's just never going to happen.
Yeah, we're not exactly living in an age of transparency right now. I'm just, for anyone just listening, I'm just showing a meme that's actually from the National Citizens Inquiry. And it says, for anyone that was planning to watch the Toronto live stream on YouTube, please note that our account is restricted for 7 days. We will be on Twitter, Facebook, Rumble, and the NCI website. So, same old YouTube anyway. But I was watching them on Rumble earlier, and we had some pretty heavy hitters in there today, especially this morning. I saw Dr. Robert Malone and Professor Bruce Parody there. So it's shaping up to be a really exciting stop here in Toronto. So
well, they put out a call for people to participate. I think Danny Bulford is the one who shared the link with me, so I did. I I got in the link, and I just applied months ago like anybody else. And then I received a call saying, hey, would you be willing to testify at this? And I thought, yeah, okay. But there's pretty much nothing that I've haven't said publicly already before. But I think they, what really interested them, I think, for me to come and testify was that I participated in the Public Order Emergency Commission.
Right.
And I was there on the ground when Candace was run over and the other man was run over by the horses.
Right.
So I was there for those things. My bank account also got frozen. So, I lost my job teaching at a college, and I haven't had a job in 18 months. And I'm not saying this because I'm telling a sob story, but I'm actively looking for employment right now because I've come to the end of the rope with all the savings, right? And I'm concerned about my financial well-being in the future because I've also been named on this $400 million lawsuit from Paul Champ.
Right.
So, anything that I actually own is now in jeopardy. Like, I could lose everything for my participation in this convoy. So I'm not sure if I'm not being hired because I might be a controversial hire for companies, or maybe I just don't have the skills that they're looking for, right?
And just for anybody who's not aware, the lawsuit that Tom's referring to there is Paul Champ. He's going after everybody who contributed to the convoy at this point. So it's the entire list of names from the Give, Send, Go. So,
well, what's interesting is I looked at the list of the original people that were named in the lawsuit, and there's only 19 people with names on it. Mm-hmm. Including the owner of Give, Send, Go. But there's about 40 John and Jane Does on there. So they put a whole bunch of placeholders for people in the future that they were going to add to that list. Yep. And I think Paul Champ tweeted that he was only going to go after people that significantly contributed. So if you've donated $50, he's probably not coming for you. Yeah. But why my name is on the list? This lawsuit is about horns, the honking of horns, the phantom honking that people hear, and the phantom trauma that they have experienced. I mean, we saw the person who launched this, Sexy Lee, who, when she was testifying, was practically laughing, smiling, and giddy, describing the trauma that she felt because of the horn honking, right? Even though she was throwing eggs at trucks.
Yeah.
He admitted to throwing eggs at trucks and vandalizing trucks. But the irony of this whole lawsuit is they can't point to one single person who's named that actually honked a horn.
Well, and the other thing is that there was an injunction put in place to get them to stop honking. I think it was after 6 p.m. and they abided in that. Might have been 8 p.m. I can't remember, but they abided in that injunction. I thought that was all kind of settled. So
here's an interesting thing is that, the police in the city refused to allow us to get the porta potties that we rented and got put into place. They refused to allow us to get them pumped out and cleaned, right? They wouldn't let the pumper trucks up onto Wellington. So, then they were running around. I'm sure somebody at some point probably peed on somebody's lawn because out of pure desperation, right? But I was trying to negotiate with the police to say, look, let's start trading porta potty cleaning for horns. Like, I thought that was a reasonable thing. It's like, look, we'll stop the horns if you just let our truckers go to the washroom.
It's just so inhumane that they would ever stand in the way of basic sanitation like that.
Yeah. And then we got vilified, right, in the media for people defecating on lines. It's like, I never actually saw it, and I don't imagine that's any different than homeless people. Right.
Right.
And when there's thousands of people in the downtown, it's not like you're going to drop your drawers and just drop a coil on the grass there in front of everybody. Like, it just, like, I don't know, maybe it happened in the middle of the night, but I can't honestly think that anyone would think that was a good idea, that somebody pooping on someone's front lawn was going to go unnoticed. Well, and the rest of us were going to look terrible for it.
And it's
Right.
like the peeing on the monument, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that was probably one of Jimbo,
Yeah.
what's his name, Mayor of Ottawa there.
Oh, Jim Watson.
Jim Watson, thank you. Yeah, that was probably one of Jim Watson's staffers, like purse dogs or something, that
Yeah.
he got them to take out there and
Oh yeah.
take
Yeah.
a couple of pictures or something. So
Yeah.
yeah, the whole thing was just a hatchet job
Yes.
across the board. So
Yeah. Well, I mean, on the 7th of February last year, Keith and Ever were in court dealing with this injunction about the
Mhm.
horns. And, Justice McLean in his ruling, because I've got a copy of it, in his ruling said, you have a legal right to be there as long as you don't break the laws.
Mhm.
It's a legal protest. So he ruled that we had a legal right to be there.
Mhm.
And so we were always under the assumption, okay, we've got a legal right to be here. But he said, stop honking the horns. And so we said, yeah, okay, we'll stop. There was a couple of holdouts, right? There was a couple of stubborn truckers that wouldn't listen. And one guy happened to be right next to the stage. I mean, there would be people up there speaking and he'd be honking his horn while in the middle of speeches, right?
Yeah.
So there's a story of I heard from Chris Barber where he literally got a couple guys with tools, went up to the guy in the truck and said, if you don't stop honking these horns, we are going to literally disconnect the horn from your truck. And that's when the guy said, okay, fine, I'll stop. Right. We were abiding by this thing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now we're getting sued to the tune of 400 million. And what's interesting is the lawyers had actually applied because the Ontario government has roughly about $5 million seized of the Give, Send, Go money. So they seized roughly $5 million. Our lawyers applied for $450,000 of that money to defend ourselves in the lawsuit and then to also other truckers that are in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
A judge said, no, you're not touching that money. They said, go out and use your own means, other sources of revenue or other sources of money to defend yourself in court. You're not touching that. And I'm thinking, but that's what the money was raised for food, for fuel, for anything. Like, it was donated to the truckers. I mean, I'm sure people anticipated that there was going to be legal trouble, maybe, and that they would be okay with the public. The public that raised the funds would be okay with supporting the truckers in legal charges or lawsuits or anything like that.
I'm pretty sure, everybody understood that it wasn't going to cost $10 million to fund the hot dogs.
Yeah.
And people continued giving. Like, it grew fast, but everybody was aware of how big it was. When it was in the millions, it was getting up there, and people were giving, all the way up to $10 million. So I'm pretty sure they understood very well that some of that would go to the lawyers. Yeah.
Yeah. So now the judges said, nope, you don't get to touch that money that was donated to you. You don't get to touch the public's money that was given to you.
Like, on what grounds? Do you know?
They seized it as proceeds of crime.
What
Interesting.
crime?
Yes. Great question.
The illegal protests I keep hearing about?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly. This illegal protest, the occupation.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
I mean, it was all hip and kosher when it was Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
Which went on for a hell of a lot longer than the Ottawa protest.
Yeah.
And you've never seen, a better run protest anywhere. Not that I had ever been to one before that, but better sanitation and lower crime than they would have on a regular day. So not a lot to complain about.
Yeah.
But here's what we got coming up with the NCI. So today was actually a pretty big day. We had some heavy hitters there. Dr. Robert Malone, Bruce Pardy. First thing this morning. So anyway, I thought maybe I'd throw a couple of clips up here. Here's Dr. Robert Malone. So he's he's the co-inventor of the mRNA vaccine technology. And he's American. So here he is testifying at our National Citizens Inquiry. So This is a big deal. I
Yeah.
think when you look at the website and the mandate, and you say, okay, like it's another kind of fact finding mission. Is it going to have any teeth? Well, that remains to be seen. But yeah, I mean, it's there are some really serious experts coming out to give testimony here. So
Yeah, and I mean he is a pretty big heavy hitter for this inquiry, right? Because this is again about the transparency,
Mhm.
and the government's not going to give the transparency. So this is when the citizens are saying, "Fine, we're going to show the world what's been going on." But what's interesting about Malone is that he didn't invent the vaccine. He co-invented the mRNA technology,
Mhm.
which was then later taken and converted and applied to vaccinations.
Mhm.
And he, from my understanding, he's doubly vaccinated himself
Yeah, I think
with
that, yeah,
Pfizer,
sounds right.
but he didn't know that Pfizer had lied. And that's where he started to ring the bell and to say, hey, I've looked at what you're doing here, what you're saying, and you've lied.
Mhm.
So to have him come on there as the guy who created basically like the delivery
Yeah.
of this system to come
Mhm.
on and testify, that's pretty big.
Well, you know what I found fascinating, actually, about the testimony he gave is he spent a pretty significant portion of time talking about fifth generational warfare.
Yes. Yes.
That's a hobby horse of his.
Yeah.
I had seen him talk about it in some other videos, but man, he is beating that drum like it seems like
Yes.
every chance he gets. So
Mhm.
I think I'll just throw a couple of minutes of this here and
Sure.
yeah, get some thoughts.
I've seen him talking about fifth gen warfare as well.
Yeah. This I got it clipped right up to the part where he's talking about Canadian propaganda in particular. Check this out. Oh, this is Maverick Media, by the way. I went on Rumble and discovered today that I couldn't go back far enough while they're still doing the live stream to
Right.
get the morning. But luckily, Facebook has that capability, and Maverick Media was restreaming
Good.
it. So, yeah,
Good.
good job, guys.
In the lay press from Canada and the UK documenting the deployment of military campaigns involving fifth generation psychological warfare and information warfare against the Canadian population. When you say conducting propaganda during the pandemic, this is fifth generation warfare. This is what was deployed on you by your own military. This is from the Canadian Joint Operations Command, etc. As you notice in this article by David Pugano in one of your lay press publications, this plan devised by the Canadian Joint Operations Command relied on propaganda techniques similar to those employed during the Afghanistan war. In other words, that's a euphemism. They deployed the fifth generation warfare technology designed to combat the Taliban against you, the civilians of Canada. Now, this is an example of one of the battle groups in the United States, the 4th Psychological Operations Group based in Fort Bragg. This is a recruitment video just to give you a sense of the nature of this technology. This is the group that was developed from the Ghost Army of World War II that was used to fake the German army about the landing at the end of the war.
This is a great video. I've seen this a few times. Drew showed it to me.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Now, I had to go grab this section because this is what I'm always saying. I'm always pointing back to Sun Tzu and how China is really the center of gravity for this whole thing. And so that's what Sun Tzu said. He said the supreme art of war is to subdue the enemy without fighting. So I just thought it was, good job, me. Robert Malone is backing me up on this. So
Yeah. Yeah, this is a really powerful video.
and the volume is up as much as I can get it, guys. So.
Close, hiding nearby, whispering to or die.
All the world's a stage. All right. So yeah, some pretty, I think, pretty powerful stuff coming at Robert Maloney's up there talking about fifth generational warfare. I was impressed at how deep into the Canadian propaganda he went. Like he made it specific to the news headlines, and he's talking about Sea Joke there, the Canadian Joint Operations Command. That's the Canadian Armed Forces. That's the central hub for all its operations, and they got busted already early in the pandemic. Like he said, conducting psychological operations on Canadian citizens to coerce compliance with mandates. So
yeah, and I think they ran an exercise, like a test exercise, on the East Coast, little small town, and then they got caught, and it turned into a big investigation.
Yeah, that sounds about right. And let's see. Another one we had up here this morning. This guy is Bruce Pardy, as it says, executive director, Rights Pro, professor of law, Queen's University. I got some noise coming on your end there.
Sorry. Just moving my microphone a little.
Okay, you're good. This is another heavy hitter, I guess. Professor of law, Queen's University, and I thought he had some pretty interesting things to say. So I thought I'd show a couple of minutes here. Oh. That's just him introducing himself.
So I want to start with this thought, which is that the most powerful ideas are the ones you don't know you have. And one of those ideas is the problem here. I want to try to answer this question for us today. During COVID, of course, people were told what to do and what not to do. They were told not to walk through the park. They were told to close their businesses. They were told their kids couldn't go to school. They were told that they couldn't go into the store without a mask. They were told they couldn't have a job without a vaccine, and so on. And during this period, people thought the law would save them. This seemed like society unraveling. It seemed insane. And they thought, the law will save us. The law is solid. The law is written down. The law will bring this back. And it did not. Many people tried. They found a lawyer. They brought an action. They brought a challenge to this rule or that. And those challenges, for the most part, were rejected. And the question is why? And there may be many answers to this question, but I would like to suggest two. The first one is that this is a reflection of the triumph of the administrative state. That system of governance is based upon an idea. And that's the idea that I want to talk to you about. This is the important idea that we don't know that we have. And the second reason is that the charter that a lot of people put a lot of faith in did nothing to push back against this idea. And in fact, in some ways, because of the way it is interpreted and applied now, the charter, instead of opposing that premise, that idea, in some ways now facilitates it. So, the premise, this idea that is the problem. Let's start with this. Our law is based upon ideas. Now, it might seem that the law consists of books, of words. You go off to the shelf or onto the internet, and you open it up, and you see what the words say, and that's the law. And that's true, of course, to an extent. But the legal system is also based upon a certain number of ideas. Here's one of the ideas, that the state is based upon 3 different branches: legislature, the administration, or the executive branch, as it's sometimes called, and the courts. And one of the important ideas that we have had in our law for a long time is that these 3 branches of the state do different and distinct jobs. And one of the ways that we are protected from our state, from our own state, is that these 3 branches are distinct and they cannot do the job of the other. In other words, it prevents power from being concentrated in any one organ or person. Legislatures legislate. They pass statutes that contain the rules. Courts take those rules and they apply them to particular cases. And the administration takes the rules that the legislature has passed and they enforce them, they enact them, they don't enact them, sorry, they carry them out. Now, one way to understand which part of the state we're dealing with at any particular moment is to think about it this way. We know what a court is, and we know what a legislature is. A court has a judge and a room, and it involves a dispute and evidence and so on. And a legislature has elected people, and they pass statutes by vote. Everything else is a part of the administration. The cabinet, the ministries, the departments, the agencies, the tribunals, the commissions, the law enforcement, and so on and so forth. Now,
Military.
here's the basic idea.
Mhm.
The administrative or executive part of the state is authorized to do nothing unless the legislature has passed a statute saying that it can. And that's a great rule. And that's a rule that the courts did enforce and still technically do enforce. But here's the problem. The ideas upon which our legal system are based are changing. They're evolving, if you like, but they're evolving in what I would consider to be a very dangerous way. Here is now what is happening, and it's been happening for quite a while. This is not just a COVID thing, but it reached its height during COVID. Here's what's happening. Legislatures, instead of passing statutes that contain all the rules, are now passing statutes that delegate rule-making authority to the administration. It doesn't mean, I'm not suggesting that there aren't statutes with rules in them. That wouldn't be correct at all. But more and more, our statutes include sections that say, and cabinet can make regulations about these things. Or the minister can decide this list of things. Or this public health official can do these things. Or this commission can do that. And the actual rules that apply to us day to day, more and more, are not in the statute. They are in the rules made by the administration. Now,
The bureaucrats.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I think man, if there's one thing I'm sick of hearing about, it's conflict of interest. So the
Yeah.
whole, the
Yeah.
whole purpose of having those three separate branches of governments is to avoid a situation like this, where the people enforcing the rules are also making the rules.
Yeah. Yeah. And, even from my perspective, I didn't know hardly anything about really the charter and all that kind of stuff prior to the pandemic. Like, I really didn't.
Mhm.
But, right over there in my gym bag, I don't go anywhere without taking a copy of the Constitution and the charter. Like, it goes everywhere that I go.
Good plan.
And so if you read through it, and I saw an interview not long ago with Brian Peckford, and he actually said he doesn't know who wrote Section 1. Nobody knows who wrote Section 1.
Really?
Yeah. Even Peckford didn't know who did it. And Section 1 is a vitally important section. But when we go to Section 33, this is probably one of the most important sections, because that talks about the notwithstanding clause in Section 33. And if you read the language, I mean, you really do have to have a degree in law to even decipher those sentences. They're so convoluted.
Mhm.
But Section 6 is one of the ones that is specifically exempt from being affected by Section 33, the notwithstanding. So basically, the suspension of your charter rights. And I saw an interview with Peckford. He said, we specifically considered all emergencies, including a pandemic, where Section 6 is your mobility rights. So the government cannot, under any circumstances, suspend your mobility rights under Section 6. It is specifically mentioned in Section 33.
Mhm.
And yet Peckford went to court, and he sued the government with a couple of other guys plus Maxime Bernier. So four groups or four people sued the government of Canada for Charter Section 6 violation,
Mhm.
and they lost.
Yeah, didn't they say it was moot? Is
Yeah.
that where? Yeah, that's where it went. Eh?
So the government came out and said, well, they've been suspended. These regulations or these mandates have been suspended, so therefore your argument is moot. It's like, yeah, but you've already committed the crime. You've already violated people's charter rights.
Mhm.
There has to be a remedy to doing so, right? And by the way, these things weren't ended; they were suspended, right? And so, and the other thing that the public has to understand, and I didn't know this until a lawyer friend of mine told me this: the Charter of Rights, the reason it exists, is to protect you and me from the government. You can't launch a charter challenge against your neighbor or Tim Hortons or Walmart or some business. It only exists to protect you from the government action. So that is something that people have to understand about the charter. And I know there's always an argument about the Bill of Rights and the charter. The bill doesn't go far enough. I asked specifically to Brian Peckford this. I said, why is there this contention about the bill versus the charter? And I said, is it because the bill is a federal regulation? It only encompasses what the federal government does to the people? He says, yes, that's exactly it. The bill didn't go far enough. You can't do a Bill of Rights challenge against your municipality. It's the Charter of Rights is a federal, and it's a provincial, and it's a municipal thing. A police officer is a municipal employee that you can launch a charter challenge against a police officer because they're an agent of the government.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is the thing. But I take, I've listened to the things that Bruce Party has said before.
Yeah.
And I know there's sort of a divergent opinion between Bruce and Brian Peckford. But I think what's happened is lawyers over the last 40 years since the inception of the charter have done things that has weakened and watered down the charter.
So just to, I got the the charter up here on the screen for anybody just listening, but just to kind of orient everybody as to what Tom's talking about here. Here's section 1, the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and it says the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantees the rights and freedoms set out in it, subject only to such reasonable limits and prescribed by law as can be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society. And I think you were just saying a minute ago there that Peckford says nobody seems to know where that came from. And my understanding, and I'm not taking a position on this. I agree that what you just said in favor of the charter over the Bill of Rights. Yeah, we need a charter, but the criticism is, because what I hear the folks who are all about the Bill of Rights saying is that it was an act of treason and that that shouldn't be in there.
Yeah, and here's the thing. I look at it this way. It doesn't matter what legal framework you're talking about right now, whether you're talking about the bill, the charter, the Magna Carta, anything. It doesn't matter what the legal framework is if the government themselves and the courts themselves don't abide by it. Like it doesn't matter. I mean, you could have the holy grail of legal frameworks, but if the courts and the government don't abide by it, what does it matter? Okay. And the other thing is, from me, I mean, I don't discount the argument that people that support the Bill of Rights say, and they could be very right. I mean, the common law, the admiralty law, all the different things out there, those people could all be right. But at the end of the day, who controls the courts? The judges. And who controls the law enforcement? The judges on a court order. Are the sentence is or the punishment is carried out by law enforcement. So again, I question that it matters whether or not you use the bill or the charter or any, whatever they use in the Flintstones. It doesn't matter what your legal framework is if the courts and the police don't abide by it, or the government.
Well, you know what I'm going to say. It's the same people in all those organizations.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. And I'm not really seeing, there's a thing called the judicial notice. Okay. Where governments were just, without validating or even without demanding evidence in the early days of this. Yeah. Where the judges were just accepting something called judicial notice, where they're like, we're not going to question it. We're taking your word because you're a public health expert, that you know what you're doing. We don't care about the evidence. We're not even going to ask you to provide evidence, which was all part of the censorship problem, right? Judges took their eye off of the evidence. They weren't interested in the evidence. And so they were making rulings, and it took forever to get a case in before a judge anyway, but they were making rulings based on judicial notice. They didn't care to see the evidence. They just took the word of people like Teresa Tam and Bonnie Henry and stuff like that. They didn't care.
I'm seeing that come out in some of the ATIPs I've even submitted, like to the Nova Scotia Health Authority, where when they divulge like the basis for the mandates, it's just WHO, recommendation that cites mask wearing as low confidence that it'll actually mitigate any harmful impacts of COVID. So it's all very flimsy, and I think that the part that everybody's kind of overlooking here, because I don't want to say Bruce Parody's overlooking it, but the Oakes test, there's that when you submit a challenge and you say like this is cannot be demonstrably justified in a free and democratic society, they're supposed to weigh it against the potential harms to the person's autonomy or whatever. So but there's an Oakes test, and it's based on this case of RV Oakes, where somebody was caught with a couple of grams of marijuana or something, and they charged them with trafficking, and the challenge of course was, well, it was a very small amount, so it doesn't even make sense that this might be a trafficking charge. So you'd have to demonstrate how you would come to a conclusion that 2 grams was an amount that was commensurate with, drug trafficking. And that's how we ended up with, I think it had to be an ounce after that, if I remember the 90s, as well as I think I do, which I'm not saying I do.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was kind of the basis for that. And so we've never seen the demonstrable justification for any of this anywhere, and it hasn't come out in any court. It's just sort of been dismissed and now called moot. So
Yeah.
where do we go from there?
And it's interesting too, because the very first time I read the charter, the word that stuck out to me was demonstrably. Right. And this is part of the Canadian censorship, the media censorship, right? That they're not going to allow the concept of demonstrating their evidence or their justification for this. They're going to push right past that and basically go to these mandates that a lot of people in the beginning did abide by this stuff. And then after a while, when you just started to realize like the BS card was just too glaringly big, you started having to throw that card, right? And so it didn't take long for me to even stop wearing masks. I wish I'd have done it sooner than I did. But, people were just screaming for the evidence. Just show me the evidence. And I mean, people like Chris Guy, as an example, were instigating and wanting to get into court to get them to reveal it. Even the reason Pat King became famous in Canada was because he came out in his court case and said, this is going to force them to show their evidence that they've got.
Yeah.
And of course, I don't know whatever happened to that, but this was always the issue, getting the evidence before a judge. Judges didn't seem to be interested in looking at it.
I have a charter challenge too, actually, in Kew in Nova Scotia, and that's what I'm trying to do. And that's just kind of my own crusade too. I should probably get a goddamn lawyer, for crying out loud. But yeah, what's that?
You should. You don't want to end up getting debanked.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I just wanted to make it my own crusade, but anyway, I'm hoping that ends up bearing some fruit. I should be in court in the next couple of months, and actually I'll be in court again for the arrests in Ottawa as well. So we'll see what comes out of that. But I'll throw to, we have another heavy hitter that the inquiry had. This was on the Truro stop, actually. But Professor Peterson is weighing in. So like I said, the NCI, it seems to be drawing like all the right talent, and I'm optimistic that it really is kind of the best hope we have right now at this particular moment, I think. So
for me, when I get there tomorrow, I'm going to talk to them and say, hey, like, what is the possibility that this is how I found out that even a parliamentary inquiry doesn't really have any teeth. It's like what you're talking about, or what Bruce Party was talking about with the executive branch. They're responsible for the administration of these things, right? And it's not a court of law. So even a parliamentary inquiry is not a court of law. The only ones that give it any teeth, any legal substance in the end, is the sitting government at the time. So my thought was, do we try to find an MP with a little bit of backbone, and maybe an independent federal MP, and say, we'd like to get some sort of legislation going forward that makes if the citizens meet a certain threshold, right? Like, you don't want to be launching public inquiries with one guy in his basement who spent $5 on a podcast doing it, right? That is going to force the government to take it serious. Like, yes, I want them to take everything serious, but you know what I'm trying to get at. But if the public is going to come together and meet certain criteria that would be commensurate with even what a parliamentary inquiry would be, then why shouldn't that be legally protected? Why shouldn't, if the citizens are so desperate that they come forward and say, hey, we're going to fund this, we're going to find a commissioner, we're going to get lawyers involved, and we're going to do this as a citizens inquiry to shine all this heat and light and transparency on an issue in this country, because we've lost complete faith in any level of government or any government body to actually do something about this, because we don't trust them. Right? That in itself should be given legal protection as an actual thing. When but you know, the public might argue, well, isn't that what the members of parliament are supposed to do? Yeah, but what happens when we don't trust them? We don't have any recall legislation. So what course of action can we take against an MP?
That's right.
We gotta wait around for the next election?
The next Chinese controlled election?
Yeah, the next stolen election or influenced election.
Yeah.
I have no faith in these Dominion voting machines.
I think they're only for the nominations. We don't use them for Elections Canada. That's all.
Yeah, I think Elections Ontario used them.
Yeah, they might for provincial, but for federal.
Yeah, they did for provincial. They were using machines for provincial.
Yeah, Elections Canada is still paper, I think.
Yeah,
it was last time I voted, and the Dominion stuff is crazy shady, and that's what we've had the last couple of what is now the Progressive Conservative Party. The last several election races there, Blandrew Scheer, then Blandrew Scheer without the dimples, and and now. Paper Tiger Pierre Poilievre. So they're anyway, they're picking all the winners for us. But here's Professor Peterson, and he weighed in. This was on the Truro stop there. So
let's lay out what happened.
Man, it's quiet, isn't it?
We faced an unknown threat of indeterminate magnitude.
There we go. This one goes up.
A new disease made itself manifest on the horizon, and we had no way of calibrating the severity of the illness. We panicked. We then used the panic to justify the imposition of a tyranny that was modeled for us by an authoritarian state led by the Chinese Communist Party. So in our foolish panic, we abdicated our political responsibility, and we copied the first mover, which was essentially Communist China. How did we abdicate our political responsibility? Well, we turned over the necessity to consider a multiplicity of options to hypothetical experts on the public health front. And I would say that was an abdication of responsibility because, first of all, we turned those public health experts into political figures having to adjudicate between a number of competing ethical claims. And we also, our political leaders and ourselves as citizens, allowed our responsibility to be usurped by these experts in a time of hypothetical crisis. We then manipulated public opinion in the most egregious possible manner, using a collusion between corporation, primarily the pharmaceutical industry, government and media, who all colluded together to use fear to impose tyranny. And we did that not only by manipulating public opinion through the media, but by using opinion polls to sample that frightened public opinion, to justify the imposition of restrictions on our basic rights as a consequence of response to that public opinion, and then to lie in the aftermath of that and claim that that was all based on science. All of that was a lie, as I know full well from talking to people who were advising political figures, including conservative political figures, during the epidemic itself. We suspended our basic rights, including the rights to travel, the freedom of association, the right to bodily integrity, and there's barely a more fundamental right than that, and the right to freedom of speech. We did the latter particularly by persecuting people who dared to say anything against the panicked response to the hypothetical COVID epidemic. Here's a rule of thumb for everyone to consider in the future. Imagine there's a crisis. I suppose now we believe the next one is going to be on the climate front. Imagine that your response to that crisis is a kind of paralytic fear. then imagine that you use that fear to justify the imposition of any tyranny you feel merited, and you do so while accruing power to yourself. Well, you've just demonstrated that you are not the right leader for that crisis. That's for sure. So what else did we do? We did untold economic damage, which has not yet unfolded, to the supply chain around the world. We're going to starve tens of millions of people as a consequence of that, and put a lot more people into absolute poverty as a consequence of increased energy and food prices. We have no idea what we did on the inflationary front yet. We've seen banks begin to fail in the United States, and we have no idea where that's going to end. So that was all a part and parcel of a panicked response. We've damaged the population's faith in both public health and science for at least a generation, maybe more, because if I was a young person looking back at what happened over the last 3 years, I would certainly be disinclined to trust either experts or politicians again in my life. And the damage to public health, I suspect the consequences of that as it unfolds will be that more people will die because they're now afraid of such things as vaccines that would have died if we would have just followed Sweden's example, for instance, and left people the hell alone. I don't know how many of you who are listening know this, but Sweden now has the least excess deaths in Europe. And so the Swedish model, which did involve vaccines, by the way, but no lockdowns and certainly no mask mandates. We lied through our teeth about masks. There's no evidence whatsoever from randomized controlled trials, which are the only form of trial that matter. We lied through our teeth about the utility of masks so that we could look like we were doing something, and that's on you, politicians, who pushed that. We also
Yeah. So
I like the part, like there's a lot in there that I like, but I particularly like what he's talking about with the masks, because I had an incident at Sick Kids, and maybe I should have used some more discretion, not been so upset. But I was kicked out of Sick Kids Hospital last year for not wearing a mask.
Yeah.
My son was there for a routine checkup, but I refused to wear the mask, and I did agree to wear a shield. And they said, okay, wear a shield. So I put the shield on, and they escorted me to the door and kicked me out of the hospital. So, of course, I went out front and I did a TikTok, and I talked about what happened. I deleted my TikTok. I just got rid of it because I need less social media in my life. But I think that thing was seen by about 130,000 people, and probably 100,000 of them hated my guts for not wearing a mask inside of Sick Kids. So I did 2 follow-up videos. Or I did 1 more follow-up video to talk about the first one I did. And I said, I outlined like 10 points as to why the mask stuff was BS. And it didn't matter. It didn't matter. The people that are, mass psychosis?
Mass formation psychosis.
Yeah.
That's another thing that Malone talks about. Yeah.
Yeah. They double down on all that stuff, right? And even yesterday, somebody went on my Facebook and criticized me for not wearing a mask. And I was just like, yeah, they brought up, like, somebody wrote a whole story, told a big lie, and said that, oh yeah, you were there. I saw you at Sick Kids. Your son was off on the side bawling his eyes out because you wouldn't wear a mask to protect him. I mean, this is the level of craziness that went on. Like the general public really likes to demonize the general public for anything that's outside of the normies box, right? I stand my ground on the mask. I stopped wearing the mask going out publicly. And there's no way that I was going to wear one at Sick Kids. I knew it was ridiculous. And by the way, the 14 years prior to COVID, I never had to wear a mask inside there. I could have walked in with a sniffle. Nobody would have asked me to wear a mask. I wasn't harming anyone. Yet at Sick Kids right now, they're still making people wear masks inside Sick Kids.
Yeah, and it's just it's so cruel. I
It
find
is.
it so dehumanizing, and I say this in my arguments, my charter application too, that it robs me of my own agency. And
Yeah.
you're sick, you're guilty until proven innocent. If
Yeah.
it's any other flu season or disease, like, we're trusted to manage our own health.
Mhm.
God,
Well, it kills
responsible
me.
adults.
Yeah, I mean, Sick Kids is the reputation is that they're one of the top 5 children's hospital in North America, right? And they're on the cutting edge of technology all the time, and they're still pushing for masks. It's like, how stupid can you people be? Like, this is politics. This is political science, not medical science.
I think there's a lot to say about human nature there, and the bottom line, I think, is that we're not out of the woods yet.
No.
And what I'm kind of what underlies basically everything you say in the common thread throughout it is this kind of cultural authoritarianism,
Mhm.
where once somebody is designated an authority on something, an expert, the decision maker, the authority, then they are the source of truth. And
Yeah.
that was kind of something that I was trying to highlight there with the Socrates meme as well, is that's where his wisdom comes from, is that he knows that as a meat bag, I'm not a source of knowledge. Like, the truth doesn't come from me. It's something that's ascertained from elsewhere,
Yeah.
and is available to everyone.
Mhm. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and what happened throughout this pandemic is we basically turned all that on its head, and we went with a more authoritarian approach, where whatever serves the state is true, but there's this cultural aspect of it where people would faithfully, with religious fervor, believe these things. And also there was a kind of misery loves company component to it as well. It's like, well, I'm having to go through this, don't give me your whining, and they would there's a little bit of I think Schadenfreude, some pleasure in the misery of others, or inflicting on others as well. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. Well, there's this interesting thing that I've noticed throughout most of this pandemic, is that, when we live in this age of credentialism, I mean, everybody's got 100 letters behind their name, and that is to immediately convey a level of either perceived competence or a level of expertise in a certain area, right?
Mm-hmm.
But here's the insidious part of all this stuff. If you take a guy like Dr. Byron Bridle, okay, he makes vaccines. Like, his title, he says he's a PhD in vaccinology. This is what he does. And when he came out and did that first press conference, the first time he ever did an interview, and he says, look, we're looking at studies that says that the spike proteins are not localizing in the arm. They're spreading throughout the body into the ovaries and reproductive organs. So here's the thing about him. And I guess all people with this level of expertise, had he towed the government line, he would be, in the eyes of the media, a household hero. He would literally be a hero.
Mm-hmm.
His credentials would never be picked apart. Anybody who attacked him would be attacked based on Bridle's credentials, right? And say, you can't meet this guy's intellect or experience or education in this area. However, because he didn't toe the government party line, he's now been vilified. And it's not his credentials that people attack. It's his sanity that they went after. They vilified his character, his motivations, his everything they attacked except for his credentials, because he was a professor. He taught this stuff and he developed vaccines. He is a world expert in this process. But they didn't attack his credentials, but they'll use his credentials to hold him up as a hero if he agrees. But since he didn't agree, they can't attack his credentials. They attack his sanity. And this is the world that we live in. This is the woke argument.
it's Stalinism too, by the
Very,
way.
yeah.
That's how it was in Stalinist Russia. Is if you had a problem with the way things are being run, if you didn't like communism, well, then there was something wrong with you.
Mhm.
And we saw that coming out of the Ontario Board of Health, there, the public health officer, I think, or no, it was like the Board of Health, and they were advising physicians that if people were so-called vaccine hesitant, that they should consider giving them psychiatric medication.
Yeah.
Um,
I saw that too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it's a kind of, I think, stigmatization that they've really inflicted on anybody who doesn't participate in the mass experiment, and you know, again, it's that human nature, the tribal impulse is still there, and once you've otherized somebody as an outsider and even a threat, vermin, yeah, there's really, well, geez, just a cursory look at history. There's really no depths of depravity to which humans won't go to,
Yeah.
you know, inflict misery on that, on the other. So,
Mhm.
so
Absolutely true. And we
yeah,
point out all the time. I was talking to my son about it not long ago, to his much, annoyance. The fact that every mass murder, and I'm not talking about an active shooter, but every mass murder in human history has always been perpetrated by the government of the people that were murdered. You know, and so when people say the government would never do things to me, I'm like, have you never ever even heard of any human history before?
yeah,
And then the argument is it's in bad taste. How dare you compare the Holocaust? It's like I'm not the only one comparing the obvious parallels with the Holocaust.
yeah.
Actual Holocaust survivors are
Mhm,
ringing that bell loud and clear.
mhm,
Eastern Europeans who have come up through communism. My girlfriend is from Poland. Her parents came up through communism
mhm.
before they came to Canada in the 90s. So, like, these parallels are they're so perfectly matched and so obviously glaring.
Mhm.
And for anyone to deny it, I mean, we get into this Yuri Bezmenov stuff where he talks about, like, look, the liberals, they're not going to. You can kick them in the ass as they're boarding onto a train, and
Yeah,
they're still not going to believe. You can show them all the evidence in the world of what is happening, and they're still not going to believe it, even when you put them up against a wall and shoot them.
yep, yeah.
Right?
He said that, you know, once they've undergone the process of active measures or
Yeah.
cultural subversion, that yeah, they will scream for equality right up
Yeah.
until the moment Jack Boot caves in their skull. So
Yeah, and here's the beauty of that whole argument is that he even says all of these people that bring in this Marxism, the moment that it's in and they feel like, hey, there's going to be a place for me in this new world order,
mhm,
that's when they find out that they're actually now a threat to the new world order, because these were people that had original thoughts and brought in this new system. When they realize they're not going to be the benefactors of the new system,
mhm.
well, they might start pushing back the way they did the first time around, bringing in the Marxism. So they're now expendable. In fact, they're kind of a liability.
Mhm.
So you bring in this kind of new way of life in the future, you're not going to benefit from it. It's not being brought in for your benefit. It's for the one percenters.
Yeah, and I think that's what Bezmenev was really warning us about, though, is it's not going to matter once the useful idiots are so brainwashed. There's really no reasoning with them, and
Mhm.
that's an interesting thing I think about the human mind, is it's not necessarily reasonable. I think there is a very substantive difference that we're faced with here, and probably 80% of the global population is still stuck on their default authoritarian setting,
Mhm.
with that you know, basically a tribal social hierarchical primate, and the Eastern mind is actually quite different than the Western mind. It's not logical. It is whatever serves the regime is true, and they tend to it mimics a religion, really, an authoritarian regime, and they do it in the same way that people often do with religious stories and whatnot, is they will sort of bend all of their usual logic around this particular story or this particular narrative. And so the process of compartmentalization takes place, I think, like a psychological compartmentalization, where there is this one little area of their brain where they won't allow their logic to seep in, even if they're, perfectly capable of applying it elsewhere in their lives. Once it becomes like part of the religion, part of, their belief, their deeply held belief, then there's no penetrating that. So,
Yeah.
But that's well, I guess that's the product of active measures all the way back in the 60s. He said everybody who was subjected to that going to school graduated in the 60s, and that's the boomers. And
yep, pretty much
right now. So,
yeah.
I'm going to throw to another clip here. This was a doctor from Newfoundland, and I thought I'd show just a minute. It's only about a minute long here, and it's pretty powerful stuff. But this is another one coming out of the National Citizens Inquiry here. So there's some really, really good testimony being given.
Newfoundland and Labrador, all told, I think we've had 300 or 400 deaths. I haven't looked at it recently. They haven't reported it recently, so I don't know. But I know that between May 11th and June 8th of 2022, there were 11 deaths reported, and they used to do daily updates and say how many cases were from which area, which age groups, and so forth. They noted in that release on June 8th of 2022 that of the 11 deaths, very sadly and tragically, one had occurred, our first death, in the under 20 age group. And at the same time, another one was reported in the 30 to 39 age group. And to this date, they are still the only two under the age of 40. All 11 deaths that week were fully vaccinated. So not a single unvaccinated person under the age of 40 has died in Newfoundland and Labrador attributed to COVID during the entire pandemic.
Yep.
Unbelievable.
I mean, even Ontario tried to make an announcement one day that a young person had died of COVID. Unfortunately, the headline went out to the public, and people were all like, "Oh, the children are at risk now. We just lost one." Turns out that child had more than 4 comorbidities, or more than 3. Same thing. One of the public health people out west?
Yeah, I almost said Bonnie Henry, but it's Alberta.
Yeah.
Who is the public health officer in Alberta? She got fired.
Dina Hinshaw.
Dina Hinshaw, yeah.
Yeah.
She tried to say that a child who died of cancer, who was in palliative care and tested positive for COVID, like just prior to or just after passing, that she counted that as a COVID death. And not only did that, but told the story of the boy, like in order to manipulate people's emotions. And it was the sister of the boy who went out on Twitter and said, like, this is depraved.
Yeah.
What Dina Hinshaw just did. So
yes. Yeah.
Pretty unbelievable. And just if anybody's interested, you can go to the NCI website and apply to be a witness if you want. So if you have a story to tell, there's excuse me, the non-expert witness application form here too. So that could just be anybody, right? You don't have to be an expert to apply. And I think they're doing a lot of stuff by Zoom. So more power to you, folks. If because this seems to be where all the traction is right now. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I think it is right now. And I do think it's, I was a little bit unsure of it in the beginning as well, because I thought, if it doesn't have any teeth, is it going to turn out to be another version of the Public Order Emergency Commission? Now, the interesting thing about that commission was, people could log in and watch the testimony. Where it was, what came completely off the rails was when that report came out. At the end, like Rouleau's report was disgusting. I've got a clip. I found a clip through a friend of mine who works at Rebel Media. Found the clip, and it was when Haddam, one of the lawyers for the JCCF, was cross-examining David Vigneault, the director of CSIS. And he's walking, Haddam was walking the director of CSIS through the 4 conditions of Section 2 of the CSIS Act.
Mhm.
And Rouleau actually says to him, you know, you've only got 10 minutes. I'm not sure it was the best strategy to waste your time, because it's been well established that the government didn't meet the 4 conditions under the CSIS Section 2.
I remember
And
that.
I looked around the room like, okay,
It's
it's over.
done.
It's done. It's
Yeah.
done. It's over. Right. And then what does he do? He turns around and he says, and he writes a report and says, yeah, they were justified.
Yeah. The
I
very high threshold
The
was
very
met.
high threshold was met. Yeah, I was disgusted. And you know, and in the early days of the commission, we were quite surprised at how well it was going, like how well the commission lawyers were doing. We felt that Rouleau was actually doing a very good impartial job.
Mhm.
And then about week 4, that's when things fundamentally changed. And then they started dumping all this data
Right.
on our lawyers,
Yeah.
where they couldn't possibly get through the thousands of records, because you only had 3 days. Like,
Mhm.
so for example, they would, if you knew you were cross-examining somebody on Thursday,
Mhm.
you had to get your stuff in 3 days before. Well, the government, the Justin department, not the Justice, the Justin department, was dumping thousands of documents 3 days before we were going to cross-examine one of their witnesses. It's like, we can't get through that stuff. It's humanly impossible to get through all that stuff and look for evidence.
And also, just like if you want everybody to read your report, then you make it like 1 page. If you
Yeah.
want most people like to read it, you make it like 5. And
Yeah.
if you want nobody to read it, you make it over 2,000
2,000.
pages.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Based on 6 weeks testimony.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think we were all really disappointed with that. I think he like there were so many reasons given to question the narrative being put forth, and he still went in the tank with Diagolon being
I know. Yeah.
just
I
like
know. I know. I know. It was incredible to me that to even see mention where he was literally discounting. I think he's the OPP superintendent, Pat Morris,
Mhm.
who I actually liked. I thought his testimony was outstanding, 99% of it. I don't like when he would refer to the convoy as an occupation or illegal this or that, but
Mhm.
everything else was exceptionally professional. I was shocked by the level of professionalism that we saw come from the OPP in that.
Mhm.
I'm embarrassed that I even have to say that I was shocked about that. Okay, because these guys do a tough job, but by and large, head and shoulders above everyone else, I thought the OPP were exceptionally professional in their testimony and the things that they were trying to do. Because I've been writing about my experience at the convoy, and I've had to go back and read all this testimony and learn all these fascinating things. But what in Rouleau's report, he actually didn't think that Morris was credible in certain things, which was shocking because he's an expert in this.
Yeah.
And he thought that Jeremy Mackenzie's testimony was not credible. And it was like, you're just reframing your narrative to suit your boss's desired outcome.
Well, yeah.
And it was frustrating to me because, I joked about Diagolon. Jeremy joked about Diagolon. Everybody knows Diagolon is a joke, and they took it as serious.
When was the first time it was ever even said, like the word Diagolon? It was only a couple of weeks before the convoy or something, wasn't it? It was
No, because I had heard about it. I had heard about it about 6 months before through a friend of mine, and so I didn't know it belonged to Jeremy. I didn't know because during the convoy, during the Emergencies Act, Jeremy had put out a video that he was laughing hysterically, him and a couple of friends laughing hysterically, showing clips of the Liberals and the NDP talking about the domestic terrorist group Diagolon. But they're doing the video and they're laughing like hysterically about how stupid this is.
Yeah.
Okay, so I called up Jeremy and I said, Jeremy, tell me everything there is to know about Diagolon. He explained the whole story to me, where it came from, what it was. It's a meme, it's a joke. I'm like, yeah, that's what I thought about it too when I heard about it months ago. But yet they're even in the commission, you know, they took it as a serious threat to national security.
Well, and now I'm left asking, I
Yeah.
mean, what was the legal opinion? Because we're not really allowed to know what
All
we did
redacted.
was illegal, right?
Yeah, all redacted.
Yeah, it's all redacted. So, what was it that that all of this was based on? You know?
Yeah, well, Keith Wilson has a great analogy for this because Jody Thompson spoke about they didn't interpret Section 2 of the CSIS Act the way the government did.
Oh, Jody Thomas.
Yeah, Jody
Yeah.
Thomas. Yeah, she didn't interpret it the same way as CSIS did.
Yeah.
And so Keith says, okay, fine. I'm driving down the road. Speed limit's 100, but I'm doing 120. And a police officer pulls me over and says, hey, you're speeding. And you say to the officer, I don't interpret the Highway Traffic Act the way you do.
Yeah.
Therefore, I'm not guilty of committing an offense because I interpret it different than you do.
That is the morally bankrupt mind of the bureaucrat there, folks. I was in Ottawa for 7 years, and I agree with Jody Wilson-Raybould's assessment that it really is. It's not about white and red. It's about these high-powered bureaucrats that are ruthless careerists and woefully narcissistic that just kind of keep the rest of us at each other's throats, and so they can rule over us as our lords and masters. They're just, I don't think she says it like that. She says it more like it's they're really just working toward their own shared interests.
Yes.
And to the detriment of Canadians. And I wanted to throw this up here since we mentioned Jeremy. There's a Telegram channel out there. This is Daryl. He's one of our V4F guys. He's a pretty solid guy, and he's doing a great job with the raffles to raise some money for Jeremy's legal defense fund there. And this is Daryl's Place Diagolon Kingdom Raffle Info. I am a journalist and a veteran. Views here are mine, and I'm damn proud of it. FAFO. Not sure if everybody knows what that mean, but it's F around and find out. So that's Daryl for you. And if you want to, I hear he's got like a ton of prizes too. So people are donating a lot to try to help out Jeremy's legal defense fund, and go check out Daryl's Telegram channel there to help out.
Yeah, I mean it's not only the legal defense; it's the guy was debanked for having unacceptable views.
Yeah,
that's a problem. Like that is a seriously democratic problem. How you must have a bank account in this society, the current society as it is. But when the 5 banks collude to come out simultaneously say we don't want your business, we're severing all ties with you. For what? Like for what?
And
participate in society.
So one thing I think now with Jeremy, I think I sent it to him anyway. But like he's in Nova Scotia, so under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act, they have a political belief or activity, and so that's covered under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act. And obviously, this is a political witch hunt.
Yes.
So that'd be the route that I would go. But then. I filed multiple human rights complaints to the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, and for every one of them, for the mass violations. I was refused service, at the Legion for not having the Vax Pass and stuff like that. But they come back with deeply held beliefs. So it's like, where do you, they come back and they say, no, that's not really a deeply held belief or a principle. That's just kind of your opinion. So go away.
Well, I mean, look at the Human Rights Museum in Winnipeg. They were mandating a vaccine for entry. I didn't believe it when I actually heard it, so I went on their website and I saw it, and they mandated you couldn't get into the Museum of Human Rights in Winnipeg. You're not allowed unless you walk in literally with your your gold star on your shirt.
Yeah.
Ridiculous, just fundamentally ridiculous
And wrong.
yeah
And violative of human rights.
yeah
Another one that's covered under the Nova Scotia Human Rights Act is an irrational fear of contracting disease. So yeah, I mean, to refuse somebody entry on the basis of them not being vaccinated would fall under that. But again, good luck getting any of these bodies to do anything about it. Yeah, with the administrative state, I think Bruce Parody is making a really good point, because that is what we're seeing. And I'm glad you mentioned Jody Thomas, because I've been watching her like a hawk. So she was Deputy Minister of Defense for the whole sexual misconduct affair. And then right as she's punching out, we had that whole purge of the generalship. And I've been saying that, that's because it's the boomers, and it was always them that were responsible for the misconduct. But I've also said, I wonder about this other component of it here, where you see Jody Thomas as minister does the purge of how many generals did they have to get out of the way to get to the worm that would impose that vaccine mandate, contrary to everything that anybody who serves should stand for. So it does kind of have that look and feel from the outside, because not only that, like, she purges that, or she does the purge, gets their man in there to do the vaccine mandate, and then she's promoted effectively to be Trudeau's right-hand woman as his national security and intelligence advisor. And she has neither a security nor an intelligence background.
Coast Guard.
She's a fisheries officer, for crying out loud.
She came from the Coast Guard.
Yeah, she came from the Coast Guard. She's a fisheries officer.
Last count I saw, it was 12 officers that the Liberal government have gotten rid of. The lowest ranking one I've heard of was a full colonel, and then everybody else was a general or an admiral.
12 generals?
Yeah. I think one or two are full colonels, and then the rest were flag officers.
Yeah.
Including Peter Daw, who I personally know, and is probably one of the best officers that, in our, my generation. His brother was killed in Afghanistan. Peter Daw is one of the most solid officers I've ever met in my life. And he was the commander of Can Softcom. And General Major General.
Major General. So that would have been like a competitor.
Well, it was the.
Well, no, he would have to be a lieutenant general to matter for that.
No, well, it was General Air that fired him because Pete, General Daw had written a statement about somebody who was being convicted of a sexual abuse crime. And even that crime, there was some controversy about it. But he was asked to write a character statement about the person who was accused. He wrote an honest character statement about the person he knew that was accused, and General Air fired him for it.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And he is just a frickin' worm, I think.
It's incredible. Yeah, because I remember General Air. He spoke when I did staff college in Kingston in 2007. And he was an impressive guy when he came in. Like, he's an expert in, I think, coin and counterinsurgency. Like, he's an expert in this stuff. And he's risen to the top. He's a qualified Green Beret, or in the American, he did the Special Forces course, which is grueling. And he's done, many tours. Like, he's a solid soldier. But the things that he's doing to the Canadian Armed Forces is baffling and sad at the same time.
Yeah. I mean, he's basically destroyed it to rule over the ashes.
Yes.
And geez, I mean, everything they do, I keep saying, well, the the guiding mantra here is whatever weakens the West is true. And of course, they're driving away all the patriotic people out of the military. They're indoctrinating them into a critical race worldview. So they're basically turning the military into Antifa.
Yes.
And they are, they're recruiting. The latest recruiting poster I saw was long-haired freaky people may now apply or can now apply. So
we should start calling it Caftifa.
Yeah, no kidding. And didn't we just have a mass shooting in the U.S. that was transgender? And I saw a few memes making the rounds, pointing out that has been a trend lately. That school shooters being transgender, and they're tweeting about transgender genocide. So anyway, I'm the guy who did the video on the politics of genocide, and here they are purging the military while indoctrinating it into a anti-Western communist worldview, and recruiting from a radical base, I would say. So where's this going, General Iyer? And who's really guiding it?
Yeah.
That's
what are they looking at? Like an 18% attrition rate in the military? There are 10,000 positions vacant.
Yeah.
It's not like we have all that many positions to begin with. I mean, the entire Canadian regular force, Air, Navy, Army is the size of the New York City Police Department.
Yeah.
And now it's a lot less. And recruiting is down. I mean, I certainly would never advise my children to join.
Talk my son out of it.
Yeah. I would never advocate for somebody to join the current military in its state the way it is. And I think I might have said that going back 20 years. But, why would you join the Canadian military right now? I don't know why you would join. I mean, is this just economic hardship that you're in? Like you're that desperate for a job that you'll go stick the injection into you so that you can what? Go get a job and be told that as a Caucasian male, you're born a racist?
Yep.
Sorry. I don't know what would be in it for a young person today to join the Canadian military.
Yeah. And that's just it. You mentioned the young people there earlier too, and that's I am woe to think of the prospects of a young person these days. Like I sure wouldn't want to be somebody just coming out of high school. Some of the testimony that we saw from the NCI, like people were talking about, having to do virtual proms and then making decisions about which university to attend based on residency, and then once you accept an application, like your other offers from any other university in Ontario go away, but then they go and they pull this thing where it's like they're not going to open the residence. Nobody throughout this entire process has thought about the kids or put the kids first at all.
Except the parents.
Well, yeah.
Most of them. Not all.
No, that's true. But anyway, Tom, thanks a lot for taking the time to come in here and talk to us. Is there anything else you want to plug here before we sign off, brother?
Not really. I think, I've got a lot of concerns about what's going to come up in the summer. I've been listening to a guy named Cliff High, which I'm sure a lot of viewers are listening to Cliff High's podcast, and some other people, some veterans, some really, people out there that are quite bright and doing a lot of good analysis. I'm paying attention to the CBDC, the digital bank currency. I'm trying to see what's coming into the future. I have days where I'm pretty positive, and then I have other days it's like start building bunkers, right now, I'm hopeful I'm cautiously optimistic. Let's just say that. But I have a feeling that I think by probably in the very near future, and getting into the summer, we're going to see a massive transition. I think things are becoming so obvious that you can't hide it anymore. You can't just tell a CBC news story and get away with it anymore. People are starting to wake up. And the greatest thing that has happened in 3 years is that Elon Musk bought Twitter and stopped the censorship.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't for that move, I think we'd be really far behind in our knowledge base again, or being able to share it with the normies. So I think that is a really good positive thing that has happened, but it's starting to wake a lot of people up to what's been going on. And so when people that are going to be vaccine injured or not even, they weren't injured, but they're full of these things, start to realize what has happened, I think the unrest is going to become very scary. And that's what I'm concerned about right now.
Yeah.
Very concerned about it.
I was going to say too, another thing that I find is really waking a lot of people up is the Chinese interference scandal. And I'm seeing some headlines that are encouraging coming out of even the CBC, where they don't seem to be pulling the punches on this one. I think a lot of people really are pretty peaked about this.
But I don't understand why people would think that that's actually a surprise. Like, this is the part, even when they were always talking about Trump and Russia colluding in electing Trump and all that, I'm like, why is it a surprise to you? The Americans have been doing this since the 50s when they started doing it in Iran. I mean, the whole concept of regime change, the Americans for years have been open about it. About regime change. They've even been talking about regime change in Russia, right now, getting rid of Putin. So when the Americans talk about it as if though they're ordering a cheeseburger and fries, why is anybody surprised that this kind of activity happens in the world? And why would anyone be surprised that the other powers that be are doing it to our country? Like, don't be so offended that when you realize, oh, how dare they subvert our democracy, when we as a Western intelligence in business community constantly subvert Eastern or third world democracies as a matter of doing business. So when it happens to you, don't get upset. I mean, just be accountable to it, or hold them accountable. But
I'll disagree. I'll offer a mild disagreement here. I'm pretty pro America. But yeah, I mean, I think we're talking about sort of the American foreign policy under the boomers, since they kind of came on the scene. It's been like the Bush doctrine, and even Clinton was a disaster, presiding over multiple genocides. And it really kind of comes down to the half measures. I'm actually pretty pro-regime. I think the problem with Iraq, or pro-regime change, I think the problem with Iraq is they didn't do that in the first place when they went in Gulf War One. They should have just drove all the way to Baghdad and deposed Saddam Hussein. Set up an interim government, run elections, and stick around and mentor a few generations in the practices of self-governance that we've proven effective elsewhere in the world. And it's the model that worked in Korea. It's Japan, Germany, Italy. So, the second time going in there, of course, it was for all the wrong reasons, and it was all about making money, and that's kind of what a lot of it has been, sadly, since I guess the turn of the millennium in particular. And this concept of regime change in Russia is insane, because you can't beat a guy with 1,600 nukes. There's no beating that guy. Now, I don't think that he can beat us in a ground war. I don't think that the East wants a ground war with the West. They're not that good at it, quite frankly, because they haven't really been tested in a war in a long time. And we're seeing a lot of that with Russia's performance in Ukraine. But at the same time, like, there's no way we're going to invade and depose a guy with 1,600 nukes. And if we care so much about people, what about the people in Afghanistan? Right?
Well, Putin could always just fall back. I'm sure he's got the equivalent to the Emergencies Act he could just freeze bank accounts. If the government is in peril of falling.
Yeah, he can just start selling that gas in yen, in the Chinese yen.
Pretty much.
And yeah, the Chinese, they're already building a partnership. They're all, they've been historical adversaries, and now you've got the world's largest gas supply and the world's largest population and two of the world's largest militaries teaming up, and I think they'll be bossing us around if we keep up this foolishness in Ukraine. So
there's a really interesting podcast I watched yesterday on Sean Ryan. They got a former CIA guy, Andrew something or other, talking about what does the future look like with China as the #1 superpower. And it should be concerning to people that, countries now, like this new alliance with Brazil and China and Russia, and I think Iran, it should be of concern that the dollar is being targeted as it's the base currency. But now we're starting to look at the yuan as becoming the new dominant base currency. I mean, if you, I think India is even involved in that, and it's Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Yeah,
Saudi Arabia is warm to the idea, as I understand it.
Yeah,
and if they switch, I mean, they are the centerpiece of the petrodollar, the American petrodollar. So, I think it's game over if they switch.
Agreed.
And like I said, they'll be bossing us around.
Yes,
and that's not going to look good. And on the foreign interventionism and how this is like a backlash, I don't think so either. I think, well, unless you count the so-called opium wars, I think that the Chinese Communist Party has some propaganda that vilifies the West and says that we forced opium on them, when in fact it wasn't about opium at all. Anyway, there's a real ethno-supremacism in the Han Chinese in particular. It's basically a Han dynasty in the oligarchy right now, and they just hate us. They're basically the most racist people on earth. You see the detergent commercial where the Han Chinese woman puts a black guy in the washing machine and he comes out Han Chinese.
That's terrible.
It's so real. It's like chef's kiss, perfect racism.
Perfect.
But
it's amazing the things that other countries get away with. You would be literally debanked in the West if you try to do stuff like that.
Well, and that just goes to show you how ridiculous the PSYOP really is, like the claims being made here, because the West, not only are we the least racist civilization that has ever existed, we're the only ones who even give a damn about racism. We're the only ones who even think it's a bad thing. Everybody else is like, of course we're racist. Like,
absolutely. Absolutely true. We are the only ones who care about it. And if you look at students in school having to deal with all this wokeism stuff and this sexual identity stuff, like it wasn't even an issue for them until the woke mob made it an issue for every individual student. And they're like, I don't care about this stuff. This isn't a problem of mine. This is a problem you've imposed on me. And now I have to constantly hear about it. And you're telling me I got to have a pronoun. This wasn't a problem before. Why is it now? And I my son is in high school. He's got a very great command team in his high school. So the principal, VP, excellent, outstanding. And my son received this newsletter about, it was just offered. It was an after school program from somebody to talk about the stereotypes of masculinity. So I'm like, I'll bite. So I called the VP and I had a great conversation. I said, I make no assumptions, but could you help me out? Because I wasn't aware that there was stereotypes about masculinity. Could you explain to me what that is and why my son's being offered a full day seminar on the stereotypes of masculinity? I'm very curious what it is. Maybe that's part of the thing that should be like, show me what the problem is. Because I don't think my son has a problem with masculinity, and I certainly don't think any of the kids do right now. So could you explain to me why there's an indoctrination going on here?
Mm-hmm.
Great guy. He actually went back and he got a really good explanation. So I was happy with the school's response.
Okay.
I was sad to see that he had pronouns on his title block on his email though.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's all again sort of part of the broader psyop. And yeah, they will vilify masculinity basically, like, and go after the kids and their fertility and their education, intelligence development. So down the road, they'll be too weak to run a civilization and defend it from the descendants of modern day Chinese, because that's just how they think in the upper echelons of the CCP, and so it's sort of a plan to cuck us into oblivion, essentially, and we'll shame boys for being macho or machismo, which is sort of a pejorative, or it's a very dirty word in English, but not so much in say for example Spanish. It's a positive. It's still considered to be a very positive thing. So it's anyway. I think that they're looking to weaken us in every single way possible, and it's a really it's a sad thing to see the way it's unfolding, especially as it pertains to the kids. But
I totally agree.
Yeah. But anyway, Tom, thanks again, buddy, for taking the time.
No problem.
I really appreciate it. And reach out anytime you want to come back on and plug something. And I'll be really interested. I'm glad I got you tonight before you go
tomorrow
and testify tomorrow, because I'm sure that you're going to be a very sought after man once you give your testimony. So, I'm going to be tuning in and really stoked for it. So
awesome.
Yeah. Good luck.
Well, thanks for having me. All right.
Yeah. Good luck, brother.
See you,
Have a good
buddy.
one.
You too.